Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Untold Story podcast. Really exciting this week because we are live at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It is amazing here. The city does look beautiful. It's very cleaned up and feels very ready for the convention. And the weather's just absolutely amazing. Just like a perfect summer week to be at a convention. So I'm excited to be joined by my friend and our colleague, Fox News contributor and former Obama economic advisor, and a person who really has his ear to the ground in Democratic politics at the highest levels, Robert Wolf. Robert, great to be with you.
Thank you, Martha.
So I love your Boston accent. It just takes me right up to Cape Cod when I hear you say Mather. It sounds like all my relatives on my mother's
no
side
one on your show is going to
Mather.
understand my accent.
I didn't know that. I remember when I was little, I thought that Mather there was like an R at the end of my name, but then I learned that it was actually in the middle. So good to be with you. Obviously, last night, we're going to be, people are going to be listening to this over the next several days, but we're on day 2 right now of the Democratic National Convention. Lots of enthusiasm here for Kamala Harris. She's definitely in a honeymoon period, but I felt bad for Joe Biden last night. He had tears at the top of his speech. He was taking it all in, an enormous crowd cheering, "We love you, Joe." And then when he got on the plane to leave, he said, we were pretty close in the polls. What was your takeaway, Robert?
So a few takeaways, and I appreciate you letting me give my view here. I love Joe Biden. I think about, I've known him for a few decades, and I think about you and I spoke to him when my dad died and he called me. He's just an empathetic guy. I thought he was a great president. I thought for those 4 years he did a lot of good things. I know your viewers and I would disagree on some of that. Unfortunately, from that debate on, he became candidate Biden. And I think that I believe he made a choice as well as others pushing him to make a choice, felt like, truly democracy was on the line and that the chance of him winning was unlikely. And I think that he has a tough time, with that decision, because when you're the president of the United States and you had a good 4 years, you beat former President Trump, you want to continue to keep that going. I thought last night was really great for him because there was an outpouring of love for him. I don't know what happened afterwards, but I felt great about it. I thought his family was there. I thought there was electricity in the air. The other thing about last night, and I know we'll talk about that, surprised me because I'm a moderate. I was really surprised by AOC. I mean, she really brought down the House.
She's a very strong
and
speaker.
It felt like she shifted.
She has
a
real presence.
Too.
Absolutely.
I mean,
it felt like what?
She kind of shifted a little.
In what way?
She felt like some of the things she was saying about workers. It felt like, I don't want to say. It felt like she moved a little more towards the center on some of the things she kind of brought up. And it felt like she was a real supporter of Joe Biden, and it felt good to me hearing that. But I thought it was.
What do you think she's
night.
Positioning herself for next?
I mean, listen, I don't know. It's clear that she is going to be the one owning that Bernie lane at some point, in my opinion. And let's just say, call it a third of the Democratic Party are progressive, and call it a third are, in the middle, and then probably a third are moderate. I think she has a real chance to take that lane over. But we know that to win the presidency, that lane's not enough because, the other 2/3 won't get you.
At least at this
there.
point.
At this point.
I mean, we'll see
yeah.
where it all goes. When you look at the Harris propensity to be more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, to be admonishing Israel, to be staking out some early economic ground in terms of potential price controls. I mean, I don't know if Harris is getting closer to Ocasio-Cortez or the other way around, Robert.
So I'm going to play the other side on that, as you would expect. And you and I have spoken about, I think you and I even spoke right around October 7th. And you know that my family was impacted by the Holocaust. So this is very personal to me. I have been with both the vice president and the second gentleman. I was at the United Nations with the second gentleman And I know that they are staunch supporters of Israel. There is certainly a debate within the party and within the country. And I am staunch supporter of Israel on the human rights catastrophes that are going on. My view is very clear. We need to get the hostages out. I believe in a two-state solution. That's not happening around the corner. And so I think we have to continue to be strong supporters of Israel, and I believe we are. And with respect to her economic speech that you brought up, the price controls, as you know, I spoke to the vice president that morning. And, I'm a moderate and I'm a capitalist. So I want to couch that. Price controls were not mentioned. Certainly they talked about gouging and banning and collusion. I could give you my version of that speech, which is probably different than, how a lot of people would view it. My view was, Martha, she really focused on 4 quadrants: housing, food, healthcare, and child care. And I think those are key issues, in this post-COVID, post-inflation, environment, that for people, hardworking Americans, to feel they can live the American dream again, they need to be able to afford their everyday living. And so I thought she focused on those 4 quadrants.
But let me ask you something, if I may. So, that it's all nice to say, like,
Yeah.
people should be able to buy houses. They should have childcare. They should have medical care more available to them. Those things all cost an enormous amount of money. So the people who pay for those things for other people are American taxpayers. There's only one source of income for the U.S. government, and it's taxation. So, the idea that the government can give you stuff, and I think that there are a lot of people in this country who think, well, that'll be free. I'll get $25,000 for my down payment and that will be free. But, I covered Wall Street. I'm not a Wall Street financial expert, but we all know how that works. The price of the house goes up by $25,000 and inflation gets stoked by these enormous programs she's talking about, Robert.
Martha, I think that's an absolutely fair point. One, I talked about the framework. I would look at the execution differently. I am probably more fiscally conservative than all the fiscal conservatives that blew up our debt and deficit working for President Trump. So, and we used to have those debates. And remember, when I was an economic advisor to President Obama, we had pay-fors during reconciliation.
No one even talks about those anymore.
So I
pay for is like, right. Why would you pay for it?
So just a few things.
By making cuts, by the way, that's what that means.
Right. So just a few things. Completely agree that I'm not one for the freebies. I believe in a social safety net. So let's just take housing. I'm not a supporter of here's $25,000 because I actually think that let's first build the 3 million homes. And then if we need to get help for low-income possible buyers, let's think out a different plan. So I'm in agreement with you. We have to kind of have the horse before the cart. We need to make sure that home building exists again. We're in this situation, as you know, where first-time home buyers usually buy existing homes, but instead there's no existing homes for sale. And that's why the supply demand is so off. I would say the second thing, on student loans, I was much more of an income-based process and over a 10-year period. So, if you make X number of dollars, you're not getting any reprieve. But you never pay more than 5% of your income. So I'm much more of...
But honestly, the things you're talking about, those are actual plans.
Yeah.
And those are things people can understand. That's not what we're hearing. And I think a lot of people see $25,000 is pretty transparent. That's a vote buying get. That's so that a young person in swing state districts in California are going to say, wow, I could really use that. I'm definitely voting for her.
But I would just say, listen, policy and politics has merged, with both Republicans and Democrats. I mean, you and I, we could go back to, the Trump tax cuts and, whether it's Larry Kudlow and Steve Moore, I was debating all those guys. And I was always saying to them, guys, it only works if GDP is north of 5%. We haven't had 5% GDP in forever. So this idea that it's going to pay for himself, you're kidding yourself. And now we know that the deficit and the budget has never been more ballooned than under former President Trump.
That is partly COVID. Now, he was not a big cost cutter. I will grant you that. But I would say, families had put $1,700 in their pockets, middle class families under the tax cuts.
I'm talking pre-COVID, though. Pre-COVID, his GDP was never higher than 3%. So their metrics were way off. It was going to balloon no matter what, is all I'm saying.
It was a good economy. And people, had more money in their pockets. Wages were higher. And in fact, low wage jobs were outpacing the increase of their managers in the business environment. So, he
was a 4-year president, though, not a 3-year president. If you're not going to give him his 4th year, you speak to any economist, a big part
You're talking about Trump's 4th year?
Yeah.
I mean, in the middle of COVID?
No, I'm saying what I don't understand is why we ignore the 4th year under Trump. And if we're going to, that's fine. But then you give Biden all the blame for COVID, which every economist will tell you it's not just spending. It was incredible pent-up demand of the reopening of the globe.
Well, I think that, under Biden, you had what many see as a vast overcorrection in spending. You had $1.9 trillion in a bill that was not very specifically aimed at actually helping to fix the COVID economy. And then you had another $500 million in Inflation Reduction Act, which President Biden said himself wasn't really about going after inflation. Enormous injection of spending, the likes of which we have not seen. And then we got 9% inflation.
As I said, I am always been for paying for things. Like you and I grew up, we pay for things. Both sides of the aisle, have done this for decades. This idea of going back to Bill Clinton when we had a balanced budget, or the Graham Leach Bliley bill under Senator Graham, who worked for me when I was chairman of UBS. I hired him as my vice chairman. Yeah. Those are gone. And we just live in this environment where we just keep bringing up debt.
We really can't do that.
We really
can't do that because it's like a fall of Rome situation. I mean, we have the most enormous debt that no one takes seriously. And you're right. I think there's obviously been blame on the overall increase of the debt over the last several decades on Republicans and Democrats. Nobody has taken it seriously in a very long time, which is a shame. Let me ask you this, going back to looking at this election. Obviously, this is going to be a high week. She had a huge surge because she's only been running for president for 4 weeks. And I call it the relief factor, which I guess is a product that advertises on our channel all the time. But what I mean is just this enormous relief. It's like a relief bubble in the stock market. Like, we're not going to have a horrific depression or recession or crash. And then everybody gets excited. So it's like this huge relief. Can she get another big pop, do you think, out of this week, numbers-wise?
Yeah, I would agree with you that this honeymoon period has been like nothing we've ever seen, because you and I spoke a lot about it. Like, I never heard the term double haters until maybe you brought it up to me. Like this whole idea that there are double haters who didn't like Trump and Biden, or Nikki Haley was at 20% and Biden was getting non-committals at 20%. Like 40% of the country didn't want either. Right. And I may be low. There's no question that two things, in my opinion, happened, and I'll go to the bump. One is the Democratic Party was unenthusiastic about Biden, and they all come home. It's insane. I've never seen anything like it over the last 30 days, from younger people to all walks of life. So they would, and listen, this is a choice election. So a lot of that is they just don't like former President Trump, and they just didn't think Biden could beat him. That was one. I think the second thing is Kamala has a lot of momentum. She, for whatever reason, I think it's because, I do think that this is a democracy on the line, and I think she's been very strong since the Dobbs decision.
Why is it a democracy on the line?
Because I've always thought that the two bookends were always the economy and foreign policy forever. But I actually think since the Dobbs decision that I'm hearing more and more about women's rights and voting rights and things, and climate action weren't my two bookends. But people I'm talking to, that third lane now exists where that's their number one in priority. That surprises me, but I'm seeing that now more and more. And I would say you'll see, like yesterday, you saw those women talk about their reproductive issues. I thought that young woman from Kentucky resonated with anyone who was watching, whether left or right, what she went through.
But you know that there actually were more abortions in this country this year and last year than before the Dobbs decision. The ability to find and get an abortion, the numbers don't bear out that it's become more difficult to do that in this country. Obviously, there's always isolated incidences of, a person who is not getting the service that they want from a practitioner, and they have to go elsewhere to find it. I'm not saying that there isn't, that she's not, she's sincere. Obviously, she went through something very difficult, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I think this idea that this right has been taken away, you look at conservative votes that have been taken on abortion from Kansas to Ohio and those states, because now what changed is that the Supreme Court gave the states the right to govern this at the state level. Nobody banned abortions in this country. The Supreme Court did not ban abortion in the country. That is such a misnomer. So I think people have this in their head because they're being told this by certain pockets of the media and politicians. They have a very deep misconception about what actually happened.
No, I'm not going to challenge you on the women reproductive issue. But what I would say, what I was reading this morning was that there are like 13 states, and I'm paraphrasing, 13 states that ban abortions. And there's been more rapes in those states historically than before, something like 65,000 on average per state. So I'm hearing, listen, I'm not as close enough, and we're in a political season.
Yeah, I have no idea what those numbers are, or if they're anywhere near accurate.
I'm saying,
or what would be the connection between the two things?
Well, what's happening in certain states that are banning abortion, the way it was framed is there's a lot more bad acting going on, that's happening to individuals that don't have the relief that they had in the past since Dobbs.
Okay. I don't even want to dig into that because I just think it's so, I can't imagine why crime would go up, because that's a crime. So crime would go up because people can't get abortions.
Well, that's what I heard.
Please send me the background on that, because I don't want to talk about it because I don't know.
Let's go to this week.
But this week, I was honestly, I remember the Clintons' language of, legal, safe, and rare. Okay. I was really saddened to see people enthusiastic about Planned Parenthood trucks that are giving abortions nearby this place, that are giving vasectomies. It's a very anti-children way of looking at the world. And inflatable IUDs is like just an environment that I find so sad and so joyless and so distasteful that I don't understand. I don't understand the enthusiasm around it. And I think a lot of Americans would feel the
you
same
asked
way.
me about democracy on the line, and all I will tell you is that since the Hobbs decision, I think the way Kamala has approached it has gotten a lot of favorability for her and for
it's working
the party.
Politically.
It's working.
Yeah. No, I think I would just challenge, as we are discussing, whether or not democracy is under threat in this country. I don't think it is. I think there's a lot of freedom in this country. I think people can get abortions in this country. I think people can marry who they want to marry in this country. So I think to reintroduce the idea that people should feel like those freedoms are taken away is perhaps it's inaccurate. But I think it's a good discussion. I think it's clearly a political discussion. There's no doubt about it. And I look forward to continuing our conversation next time, Robert. We will always love having you on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We really appreciate your contribution that you make
you.
to all of us in our understanding. So thanks, Robert.
Thanks.
See you next time.
Yeah.
That's The Untold Story. I'm Martha MacCallum. We'll see you next time.